we got our boy Mookie checking in, and AJ just checked in as well. For those who are not familiar with the All 32 side, which you should be, Mookie had joined us previously to preview the NFC West division and the Seattle Seahawks. As I said before, that he does cover Seattle for SB Nation. And with the Seahawks coming into town this upcoming Monday, it is only right to have him back on to preview Seattle versus Washington. Mookie, my man, it's good to have you back, boss man. How you feeling today?
I'm feeling all right. Thanks for having me back on. I got my Thanksgiving groceries, so I don't have to get out of the house for the rest of the weekend. And I'm really thankful that there are only, 7 more games left of the Seahawks season. I'm really thankful for that.
Well, hold on, man. Where's your jersey at? Like last time I saw you, you came on here with the Seahawks jersey.
Yeah, I just got back home like a half hour ago. That's why I didn't have time to change it.
Okay, all right. I'm saying I just gotta make sure you still represent out here. But if you just got back home, you get a pass. You get a pass. AJ, how you feeling today? You good?
Yeah, I'm good, man. How you guys doing?
What's up, AJ?
Everything.
AJ missed the great part of the conversation about Heineke. We would have loved to hear his opinion on that.
No, I definitely heard the back end. And I was like, man, let me just put my mic on mute. I'm not about to start my holiday week talking about fucking Taylor Heineke.
AJ, so you telling me that that Taylor Heineke isn't the best quarterback since RG3? You telling me that that's not the case?
Well, at least it's Kirk Cousins.
Man, I would definitely say Kirk Cousins.
Nah, I just said I was trying to bait him. I had that conversation a while ago. It's definitely since Kirk.
But it sound like you guys are talking about having him be the veteran presence next year at quarterback.
Yes, if you weren't going, yes, correct. And if you weren't going to go that route, I suggested that you dangle him as trade bait for the bigger fish in Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson. Excuse me, not Aaron Rodgers, because I think he's going to be a free agent eventually, but Russell Wilson and Deshaun Watson, or if they want to go the Derek Carr route, which I really don't want, but Derek Carr.
Let me ask this real quick before we get into the next segment. Should Scott Turner even be brought back as OC?
Yeah.
I'm about to say yeah.
Yeah, I think the offense played pretty good lately.
Why do you guys say yes?
Look what he's doing with a journeyman, what we would call a journeyman quarterback for one. I think, the offense, he's fighting. They look like they have an identity now. They're running the ball, and they're also, like I said, the last 2 weeks they've looked very efficient, and I think that's attributed to what Scott Turner does as a play caller.
Interesting.
All right, so Mookie, man, our situations aren't too dissimilar. Like, we have a lot of things going on. I mean, you all are reeling right now, and obviously, if it wasn't for Tampa Bay and Carolina for Washington, we were losers of 4 straight in facing some of the very similar problems that you all are facing right now. One of the things that have made headlines for you all is Pete Carroll's post-game presser versus the Cardinals. He stormed off after saying that he was tired of losing. I mean, it's the most frustrated he's been as a Seahawks head coach. He stated that he eventually apologized to the media. Excuse me. But the floor is yours. Just tell us the story of the 2021 Seattle team heading into Week 12 against this Washington football team matchup.
Well, it just feels like everybody's tired of losing. They're tired of the season. They just kind of want it to end already. There's a part of them that wants to believe that they can get rolling and make this miraculous run to a playoff spot. But to my recollection, I don't believe any 3-7 team has ever made the postseason in NFL history. Now, of course, this is the first 17-game season, and this is the second year that we've got the expanded playoff. It's still very unlikely. But on Carroll's side, he hasn't lost this much pretty much ever. At least not since his very first year as a head coach in the NFL. He was with the Jets. They went 6-10, and he got fired after that. But they were 6-5, and then lost 5 in a row to end the year. So at USC, he never had a sub 500 season. And then even the 7-9 years he had with the Seahawks before Russell Wilson, they were building towards something. It was a total rebuild to clean up the mess that was left by the previous regime with Tim Ruskell and Mike Horgan, and then eventually Jim Mora. It was a roster that was just so bereft of talent. But they made the playoffs in 2010 with a 7-9 record. And even in 2011, they started 2-6. but they made a furious rally to get to 7-7, and they were in the wild card hunt with Tavares Jackson at quarterback, and then they lost the last two. But this year was supposed to be this big push, kind of not, I won't say all or nothing, but it was a big push to make a Super Bowl run, the Super Bowl run that they really haven't had for quite some time. And it's just been disjointed. I mean, the offense has just been a major disappointment. The defense, while better over the last few weeks, has still been pretty mediocre as a whole. And even the special teams has not been outstanding. So really, they don't do anything well at a broad level. And it is just staggering to see it all collapse like a house of cards.
Hey, so you mentioned about the offense. Obviously, Russ has been back. Russell Wilson has been back for 2 games, I believe. His first game back was the Packers, and then obviously he just played against the Cardinals. The Seahawks have scored 13 points since Russ's return. And at one point in the Cards game, I believe the Seahawks had gone 19 straight drives without a touchdown. Last we spoke, Mookie, you had mentioned that if Seattle didn't make the playoffs this year, obviously you did put a caveat that injuries exempt, so there may be an out for you in this conversation that we're about to have. But you said if they don't make the playoffs this year or underachieve, you don't see a scenario where all 3 guys come back in 2022: Wilson, Carroll, and obviously Schneider, the general manager. At least one of those 3 is gone, is what you had mentioned. Where do you stand on that today? Has anything changed? And I'll leave the floor to you to speak on that.
I am still pretty certain that we're going to see a breakup at the end of the season. And I think it's needed. It's really hard to see how this team can turn itself around, given just the recent draft classes haven't been nearly as good as the one that gave you Russell Wilson and the Legion of Boom. And from Carroll's side of things, he's got it on 2 sides. One, his coaching decisions on a weekly basis are just abysmal now. And that's been a point of contention among Seahawks fans for a while. But when you have a bad team and you're constantly punting the ball on 4th and short in the opposition territory when everybody else is going for it, even in their own territory, you look so out of date. And then Carroll's also president of football operations. So he's got a major say in the front office as well. So this roster, as constructed, I would say is by some distance the worst in the NFC West. Wilson isn't the worst quarterback in the NFC West, although he's playing like it right now. But you look across the board, and if we made everybody totally healthy, so everybody who's injured right now and you put them back at full strength, I don't see a deep team as far as depth at linebacker, as depth on the defensive line. The offensive line, forget about that. It's just a team that has been reliant on Russell Wilson's brilliance for the last couple of seasons. But now that Wilson's finally been injured and he's not been playing well, this is kind of the result that you get. I mean, there have been some unlucky moments for the Seahawks throughout this season, but you could say that about a lot of teams. And at 3-7, and with one more game against the Rams to come, another against the Cardinals, heck, I'm not even entirely sure they beat the Niners in a rematch. It's possible that they lose double-digit games. So, yeah, the Wilson injury over the last 3 games that he missed could be an out of sorts, but on either side of that injury, they've rarely looked like a cohesive unit. In other words, the first part of the season, the offense looked all right, but they weren't sustaining drives on a consistent basis. It was like they're getting touchdowns or they're punting really quickly. And then the defense was a mess. Defense started playing better. Offense is a mess. And now you see in that Cardinals game, the offense was poor, and the defense made Colt McCoy look like an MVP candidate. So I think Carroll's position is untenable, but they just signed a contract. He just signed a contract extension, and so did Schneider. So the question is whether or not ownership is willing to just eat the money on Carroll and or Schneider and try and start anew. Because if it's up to me, even though I've been down on Wilson a lot these last few weeks, it's easier to find and replace a franchise head coach compared to finding a new franchise quarterback.
That's a fact. I mean, look how the Packers did it. I mean, obviously, you're not going to get rid of Aaron Rodgers. Like, that'd be stupid anyway. But for them to move on from McCarthy and then just go straight to another guy, I mean, it makes the most sense in the world. It's an easier transition anyway. And then obviously you have some pieces on the offense in terms of weapons with DK and Tyler to kind of help out Russell. You just need to bolster that offensive lineup and figure out what you're going to do with the GM and head coach. So that's your problem.
If you don't mind
go
me,
ahead, AJ.
if you don't mind me chiming in, But I think Seattle's bigger issue is that they haven't been hitting on their recent draft picks. And that's what Seattle's always been known for. You know, like one of my good friends, Cam Chancellor, you hit on him in the, fourth, fifth round. You hit on the Richard Shermans. You hit on the undrafted Brandon Browner. You hit on other guys. Like, you get to build around that nucleus, and that's what I've also been saying to you guys, Jamal and Dre, with the Washington Redskins. You know, with these first-round picks, things of that nature, you got to hit while it's hot. Because once you pay that marquee quarterback, you're cap strapped. So now, you know, I heard Mookie, you know, it's better for you to go and get a new head coach than maybe your franchise player. But in this case, they literally have to let go of their franchise player to build more assets because they've given away capital for guys like Jamal Adams and Dwayne Brown, and their offensive line isn't together. What really makes Seattle is that defense. They don't have a good rotation of DNs, D tackles that help the secondary and the linebackers. So it's like your major asset that you do have to play with, and you can still keep Pete Carroll and John Snyder because they just recently signed new deals, is Russell Wilson. Are they going to be willing to do that? And what are they willing to part with? You know, like, are they going to maybe get 3-4 first-round picks? You just don't know, but that's their biggest asset in order for this team to get back to the status that we know them to be. That's just my personal take.
Well, I'd say with the Seahawks, sorry, Jamal, the draft picks, that's a good point because, like, from 2013 to 2018, let me clarify. There is only one player on this Seahawks roster on the defensive side of the ball who's from the 2013 to 2018 draft classes, and that's Rasheem Green. And he's been an all-right rotational player on the defensive line, but like Trey Flowers got cut in the middle of this season because he was just a massive liability at corner. They kept starting him for years. And things haven't worked out with some of their other picks. Well, they traded Frank Clark, and that's one of the few assets that they had. They traded him because they didn't want to give him the big contract extension. Shaquille Griffin, they didn't keep in free agency, and he was serviceable, but following Richard Sherman is always going to be a tough task. But Jaron Reed, they re-signed for a brief period of time, and then they let him go, and he's out for Kansas City. And then everybody else has just been a bust. It's somebody, people who are not going to be able to contribute in any way. And yeah, you build through the draft. You can't just bombard with free agent signings. So like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, you can talk about Tom Brady coming there and Gronkowski and Antonio Brown, but the nucleus of that team, like Mike Evans, they drafted. Godwin, they drafted. Most of their offensive linemen, they also drafted. And then on the defensive side of the ball, they got Devin White, Levante David, et cetera, et cetera. But for the Seahawks, a lot of their draft picks have been, okay, but you can't win with a lot of okay players. You need elite talent. And the lack of all-pro selections, the lack of Pro Bowls in general, you can point to that, as AJ mentioned, and then realize that's exactly why the Seahawks are not as good as they used to be. The talent drain is real. And yeah, they are in a bit of a salary cap situation, but even when they've had cap room, they've just kind of wasted a lot of their money on 1 year and 2 year prove-it deals. And when they have had the draft capital, as you mentioned, they spend it on Jamal Adams. And I said at the time that the trade happened that if this trade backfires, this is the type of thing that can get a general manager fired. And I think that the Adams trade is now worse than the Percy Harvin trade. And it's not like Adams is a bad player. It's just that spending 2 firsts for a safety is unconscionable.
And I think one of the things that you mentioned with Percy, at least, because you made a good point, you got a Super Bowl out of it. You got a Super Bowl out of that, and it kind of alleviates the draft capital that you gave up, because I think that one was 2 first rounds, I believe, for Percy as well, right, Mookie? If I'm not mistaken.
I think it was just 1 first rounder. They might have traded down in the same draft with Minnesota, but it was just 1 first rounder. He only played 9 games. It was bad luck too because he had the injury concerns, and he obviously just liked to smoke a lot of weed, and football is eventually not a priority for him down the line. But that was a disastrous trade in theory. But he also scored a touchdown in the Super Bowl, and Denver wasn't prepared for him. But for Adams, he's made some impact plays. He doesn't have a sack this year. They've had him in coverage a lot more, but still, he hasn't made the defense functionally better. In other words, if you're going to trade 2 firsts for any defensive player, he better be a generational talent who can single-handedly make your defenses one of the best in the league. These last 2 years, the Seahawks haven't been remotely close to that.
So, one more thing before we actually get to the defensive specifics. You said on Twitter that one of the issues that was bothering you with Russell Wilson, 10 years into his career, it was something about actually, matter of fact, I think it was passes at the line of scrimmage. That was still bothering you and things like that. And it seems that the offense hasn't gotten quite back on track since he's been back in the lineup. How much faith do you think that Carroll has in Russ right now to operate the offense? That can be whether if it's from an injury standpoint or just actual from a general. I'm not sure that he can do this just yet. So I'm gonna hold off, or I'm gonna try and run the ball, or I'm gonna try to alleviate the pressure on Russell Wilson or things like that. However you want to interpret it, Mookie. How much faith do you think that Carroll has in Russell right now to operate the offense?
I think he has faith in him, but hindsight 2020, he shouldn't have been playing in the Packers game. Because if you're going to run an entire offense from pistol and shotgun, then your quarterback isn't ready to return. And also, that was a cold weather game. That's not going to help your finger at all. I think as much as Geno Smith is just not a good quarterback at all, he wasn't atrocious during his 3 starts while Wilson was out. Smith probably doesn't win you the Packers game, but he probably also doesn't put up a goose egg either because Wilson was that hamstrung. But the comment I made was just a third down play. They tried a little swing pass, a screen to DJ Dallas, and he almost threw it backwards. It just barely went across the line of scrimmage, and it was incomplete. It might have been tipped by Chandler Jones looking at the replay, but still, that play really didn't have a chance. But Wilson's third down numbers this year are incredibly bad. He's completing, I believe, 35% of his passes on third down, which is worse than Trevor Lawrence. It is the literal worst in the league. And Seattle's third down offense as a whole is just abysmal. And Wilson's got to own a big part of that. His sack rates, which has always been high regardless of down, is at 23% on third downs. That is absurd. Nobody else is even close. It just feels like the team isn't executing well and Wilson isn't executing well. And don't get me wrong, Wilson's a brilliant quarterback. To me, is a future Hall of Famer. But a lot of the things that he does well, like the deep balls, his accuracy on deep passes and difficult throws, those are things that most other quarterbacks can't do. That's up there with Mahomes and Brady and Rodgers, etc. But some of the more basic things, like throwing to the middle of the field, short, intermediate range, or going to the
like Donovan McNabb, bro.
Yeah, going through your progressions and not always big play hunting. He has some troubles with that. And certainly if you look at the all-22 of the Cardinals game, there are quite a few throws that he could have made and decided to just either take a sack or throw it to the wrong person or throw it out of bounds. So something's up with Wilson, I would say, for this season. He wasn't playing terribly before the injury, but I think that the numbers kind of flattered him a bit. It is a continuation, however, of how the end of last season went, because the first half of last season, he was playing at an MVP level. But I would say after the Arizona and the Buffalo game, he was significantly worse. Like he was still playing well, but not at an elite level. And now it just kind of bleeded over into this season. And I'm wondering how much defenses I don't want to say have figured out Wilson, but know his tendencies at this point, because they all have the next gen stats. They all have this data that they can interpret and figure out, okay, what's the best way to attack Russell Wilson and shut him down? Well, 2 high safeties is not a brand new football concept, but it feels like we're seeing more of it this year as a means of shutting down the deep passing game, which Wilson is still a generational talented at executing. But you would think that with 2 high safeties, they'd be able to do quick game, slants, timing-based routes. That's not been a strength. And now that Seattle has had issues with what Wilson does best, and they're having to rely on what he doesn't do as well with, you end up with an offense that is just unable to get going. I think this is the 5th straight game between Geno and Russ combined that they haven't cracked 300 yards. That's pretty lousy, and it's indefensible to me. And Shane Waldron, the offensive coordinator, the first-year OC, I know that he wants to do some things that he could do or used to do with the Rams when he was the quarterbacks coach, but I think some of it is that Wilson is a different type of quarterback to game plan for and to coach up in terms of his strengths and weaknesses, such that maybe he isn't necessarily a perfect fit for a quote-unquote Rams-style offense like we see with Sean McVay.
What's going on, y'all? This is Jamal, and this is just your reminder that you can catch each and every live stream episode of the Trap or Die podcast Tuesday through Thursday at 7 p.m. Eastern live on my Twitch channel. The link is in the description. And if you miss any episodes, you can catch the video on demand on my Twitch channel that takes you to each and every episode that you may have missed. With that being said, make sure you like, subscribe to my YouTube channel, where we post clips of the show, clips of interviews, interesting conversations, game analysis, film breakdowns, but also where we live stream our instant game analysis from each and every Washington football game immediately after the game is over. With that being said, I'm out of here. Y'all be safe, and I'll catch you next time. So, the defense. The defense for Seattle has given up 400 yards 4 times this year and 500 yards once. Obviously, the defense has, I mean, they've had their struggles clearly. But is this something where it's been sort of like the opponent that they've been playing, or is this something where it's just like literally them being bad? Because the reason why I asked it in that way is the defensive has had some weird, they had some really good moments, bright spots. 7th in points allowed, 4th best in run defense in terms of yards per carry, 9th on 3rd down, and 5th in red zone. So they have bright moments. However, yardage wise, they're giving up a lot. They're giving up tons. The issue with this defense, in terms of how they've been playing, but also is this something where you can see them playing better against Washington, or is this like they're that bad and Washington can probably accumulate a lot of yards against the Seattle Seahawks defense?
It feels like this is the same defense to some degree as last year, maybe subtract blitzing Jamal Adams as much, which is to say, against any competent offense, they're going to struggle more often than not. But against really bad offenses, they're able to shut down the Jaguars of the world. But this year's defense, I think the problem is twofold. One is that the pass rush has not been good enough. They're 29th in tackles for loss. They're dead last in sack rate, and they face a lot of plays. And you could say that some of this is because the offense has run the fewest plays in the NFL, so the defense is on the field a ton. But the defense, even like in this past Sunday's game against Arizona, Seattle gets 1 first down, they punt. Everybody's fresh. It's the first quarter. Arizona goes on a 9.5 minute drive and ends up with a touchdown. So that ain't the offense's fault. The defense can't be that exhausted unless they were spent during warmups or something. So for the Seahawks defense, they're good at high leverage situations. So the red zone, as you mentioned, 3rd down defense, they've been pretty good. What they're not good at, as I mentioned before, the pass rush hasn't been good enough. They don't generate takeaways. They're 26 in takeaways, and I believe they have the tied for or close to the fewest interceptions in the league. Actually, they're not quite. I think the Jets have 3. The Seahawks have 4 interceptions, and they have none from their cornerbacks. In fact, last year's game against Washington, I think DJ Reed and Shaquille Griffin got interceptions. That's the last game that Seattle's corners had an interception, because the 4 picks this year have been Quandre Diggs 3 times and Jamal Adams once. So they don't have great ball skills in terms of just getting turnovers. They don't force a lot of fumbles. So they're relying a lot on just keeping everything in front of them, but that's kind of the problem. They're not getting beat deep a lot, but they're giving up 8, 10, 12 yards at a time. So it's death by 1,000 paper cuts. And it creates such a lopsided time of possession. So the cornerback situation is probably better now than it was. Well, I can't even say that anymore because Trey Brown, our rookie, just had patella tendon injury, so he's done for the year. But he replaced Trey Flowers, so they upgraded in terms of Trey's at cornerback. But at the start of the year, Flowers was atrocious, and they played DJ Reed on the wrong side of the field. Now DJ Reed is hurt. I don't know if he's going to play on Monday night. So if he doesn't play, they're down their top 2 corners, and you have Bless Austin and Sidney Jones, and that's just a disaster waiting to happen. But really, their strength of the defense is probably Adams and Diggs together, and a surprise weakness is their linebackers. I don't think this has been a banner year for Bobby Wagner. He might be getting a lot of tackles, but the stats can lie sometimes. If you're getting a lot of tackles, but the first down's already been given up, I mean, I don't know how much value there is. Jordan Brooks is replacing KJ Wright, and he's had his ups and downs. He's been benched a couple of times this season already for Cody Barton, just for dumb plays that he made or dumb penalties. And he was atrocious in the Cardinals game. So when those two aren't on song, and it feels like a lot of Carroll's defense falls apart, and they just don't have a lot of depth at linebacker or defensive line to really scare you in any way. So Washington probably has the offense to do some damage against Seattle, especially when it comes to throwing running backs, because I know y'all have J.D. McKissick still, and he's a pretty valuable receiving back. Seattle's given up 70 catches for, I believe, a league-leading 726 yards. So any running back who plays the Seahawks will look like Marshall Faulk.
Find that prop bet. Find that prop bet on J.D. McKissick.
When he said that, my eyes lit up. I'm like, okay, that sounds like a gambler's dream.
Find that prop bet.
We've never seen a screen pass that we don't like to defend. I mean, everybody that plays the Seahawks, they run a screen pass, and it's like that's the first time they've ever seen it in their life. And it's just been a consistent issue all year, where on offense, they can't run screens, and on defense, they can't stop screens. So if you're Washington, you better be game planning for McKissick and Gibson getting a lot of touches, not just running the ball, but especially in the passing game.
All right, before we get up out of here, a couple more questions, and we can close things out. Just some X factors. I know you meant. I mean, well, first off, let's put it this way. Obviously, the X factors, or a couple of X factors, obviously on offense is Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf, and Russell Wilson. But outside of that, I'll leave the floor to you in terms of this 2021 team. Anyway, what are some X factors that we need to look out for on both sides of the ball? Doesn't have to be a ton of names, but just some people that you think can make an impact for the Seattle Seahawks defense or offense. Obviously, like you said, they aren't doing anything well right now, but at the end of the day, they're professional players. So I'm going to hand the floor to you, see what you got to say. Who are some X factors for this team, for the Seattle Seahawks?
Yeah, the Seahawks aren't so bad that I think they'll go 4-13 or 3-14 or anything like that. They got some good players. I can't even root for them to tank because we don't have a first-round pick next year. But X factor on offense, I would go Gerald Everett, the tight end. Seattle's not really incorporated their tight ends a lot this season, which was kind of one of the promises of the Shane Waldron offense, but it hasn't materialized for a variety of reasons. But Everett, he's a big body, and he's really good at breaking tackles. And I think that he can be a nightmare matchup for linebackers in coverage, provided Wilson throws to him, and as long as they're schemed accordingly. So against the Cardinals, he was one of Seattle's best players. And against the Steelers, he had one of the best plays of the entire Seahawks season by breaking tackles of 3 Steelers defenders and almost taking it to the end zone. So Everett, I think, is a good tight end whom Seattle should re-sign, whether we have Russell Wilson here or not in 2022. And on the defensive side of the ball, man, it's kind of hard to say because the injury situation means I got to kind of leave the cornerbacks out of it. And then I already praised Diggs and Adams as for the general play this year. So I go on the defensive line, but towards a rookie. And he's technically not a rookie because he got drafted last year, but he didn't play last year. Darrell Taylor, he's had a couple of sacks this season. He's got the pass rushing qualities that I think are somewhat reminiscent of Cliff Averill. His get off is impressive. He's got good closing speed towards the quarterback. He can hustle well. So I'm not too well read on the state of Washington's offensive line, but I would say that Taylor, and this is not saying much, is Seattle's best pass rusher. He hasn't had sacks in the last couple of weeks, but he's somebody who can more consistently pressure the quarterback than anybody else. And another X factor would be Brian Monet, also on the defensive line, but he's a defensive tackle. He had 1.5 sacks last week. Good run stuffer, and now he's developing some traits as a pass rusher, somewhat similar to Poona Ford. So I guess those would be the X factors. But boy, with a season like this, it's not like I got a lot of options to choose from.
Trust me, Mookie, we understand from Washington land. Like, we only got one more game more than you all, so like we understand. But with that being said, final score: who wins and why?
Oh boy, well, it seems like the road team wins this game all the time. Whenever Seattle and Washington play, except for the 2 playoff games Washington played at Seattle, like in the mid 2000s. So yeah, I will reluctantly go with the Seahawks to win this just to end the streak. I think they're going to get their butts whooped by the Rams a couple weeks from now. But just for the Washington game, I'm leaning towards Seattle like 23-21, but I would not be surprised, especially with Seattle's secondary the way it is with the cornerback situation, if they end up losing this game because Heineke just finds McLaurin all game long. Because he's one of my favorite receivers in the league, and McLaurin can absolutely exploit, especially the underneath routes. You get intermediate, get him in space, and he can cause some serious problems against the Seahawks defense that really just by keeping everything in front of them, they tend to just concede first downs at an exorbitant clip. So Seattle will win, but I'm not feeling confident about it whatsoever.
Now, you said Terry is one of your favorite receivers. I'm not going to say your favorite. DK or Terry? Who's ranked higher? You don't have to put a specific number, but who's ranked higher for you, DK or Terry?
Oh, boy. I'll go with DK. I'll go with DK. I'll tell you what, my favorite receiver is probably Deebo Samuel right now for the Niners, but, I don't want to praise the Niners so much. But I think DK just slightly, but he's not been playing well the last couple of weeks. I think McLaurin's more consistent, but as far as Metcalf's ceiling, I think in general is just higher.
Okay. All right. I'm not going to say nothing. I'll leave it at that. Before we get out of here, I appreciate you joining us as always, Mookie, man. I hope you have a safe holiday. I hope everything is good with you this weekend, these upcoming days and things like that. Let the people know where they can find you. Let the people know where they can hear from you, read your work, all that stuff. The floor is yours, boss man. It's Plug Talk.
All right, you can find me on Twitter at Mookie Alexander. I talk football, basketball, all sports. I guess the Blazers are going to be the team that I root for the rest of the season as far as getting wins. I also write for BloodyElbow.com, so if you're a UFC fan, you're a boxing fan, I cover that as well. And then, of course, I'm on Field Goals, fieldgoals.com, and that's where all my Seahawks work can be found.
All right, my man. Like I said, Mookie, it's always a pleasure. I appreciate you checking in and taking us up on this Seahawks Washington preview. Look, I know y'all not used to these things, but guess what? Washington fans are. So you have to deal with it just like we do.
Got to condition ourselves, but hey, Washington made the playoffs last year. Look at the bright side.
Absolutely. I'll take that. But yes, sir. All right, you be safe, my man, and I will talk to you on Twitter and all that stuff. Be safe, big dog.
All right, take care.
Yes, sir. Peace.
Whole hard in the trenches. Ask a nigga what he benching. Triple digits, nigga. Don't forget to mention. Whole hard in the trenches. Ask a nigga.